Hey guys, it's Generalkidd here. How's everyone doing today? So, there's always been a lot of controversy with the T ratings in recent Halo games ever since Halo 5, and more so with Halo Infinite. It's often been said that Microsoft and 343 are intentionally trying to tone down the games so that they can appeal to a wider audience. That notion was denied early on with Halo 5, and some people even tried to explain it as a hardware limitation of the Xbox One, at the time forcing Halo 5 to have reduced effects and unintentionally get a T rating. But now we all know that's clearly not the case anymore, especially with 343 banning people from Forge recently for making maps that aren't family friendly enough to meet a T rating. I've talked a bit about this in the past, and I as well as some others have compared a T rating to the censorship level of China's exclusive version of Halo MCC. For those of you who haven't seen that video before or are aware of its existence, I'll post a link to it in the description below. Basically, when Microsoft launched the Xbox One in China, they also launched a special version of Halo MCC that was heavily censored to meet the requirements of the Chinese government at the time. That version of Halo MCC never got updated to match the current version of MCC though, and it's like a time capsule to what MCC was like close to launch, with some Chinese government censorship sprinkled on top. Funnily enough, this resulted in the China version of MCC getting an ages 3 and up rating on the Xbox store in China. So that supposedly seems like it's even more toned down than a T rating in the US. So for this video, we're going to see how Halo Infinite's T rating actually compares to a Halo game that's been censored by the Chinese government. Which version is actually more toned down than the other? Well, I do want to clarify that this isn't meant to be a knock on Halo Infinite or anything like that. It's just a comparison to see how Halo Infinite's T rating compares to another Halo game that had to be toned down as well. Okay, so for this comparison, we're going to use a points system. We'll be comparing multiple categories, and each category will start with 4 points for each game. Halo Infinite starts with 4 points each category. Meanwhile, the China version of MCC will divide its 4 points across each individual Halo game in the collection, which is only 4 because ODST and Reach weren't part of MCC at the time. Each time a game wins the category, a point will be deducted from the other. So if Halo Infinite wins, then a point will be deducted from CE, then 2, and so on, unless a specific game in MCC wins, then 1 point will be deducted from Halo Infinite. And of course, if every game in MCC wins, then all 4 points will be deducted from Halo Infinite for that category. At the end, we'll add up all remaining points and see which game wins. The way we'll be judging this is based on which game is more toned down. If it's more toned down, then it loses a point. The categories we'll be comparing for this video are Dead Bodies, Blood, Gore, Friendly Fire, and General Violence. Alright, so now that I know the rules, let's get right into the comparisons, starting with Dead Bodies. So for Dead Bodies, let's start with Halo Infinite and how it handles dead bodies. Obviously the game does have dead bodies. Those are still around. Everything still works fine with both human and alien dead bodies. The bodies stay there for a fair amount of time and aren't hidden or anything like that. They still have physics and don't seem to have any restrictions on them whatsoever. So everything looks fine for the dead bodies category as far as Halo Infinite goes, which, you would expect. Now, for China's version of Halo MCC, starting with Halo 1, do we have dead bodies? No, we do not. As soon as a body hits the ground in this game, it instantly shrinks away until there's nothing left. Dead bodies are very heavily censored in the China version of MCC, and as you can see, there are no dead bodies anywhere, and you won't see any pre-placed dead bodies either. So that's 1 point off for China MCC, since Infinite clearly has the advantage here. Let's move on to Halo 2 now. As you can see, Halo 2 is more or less the same as Halo 1. Dead bodies also instantly shrink down until there's nothing left, and this applies to both classic and anniversary graphics too. So that's another point off for China MCC. Next up we have Halo 3. This time it's a little different with Halo 3. Bodies no longer shrink down to nothing. Instead, once they hit the ground, dead bodies just fade away until there's nothing left. Not sure why things changed with Halo 3, but the end result is still the same. There's no dead bodies in the game. And that's been completely censored all over. So once again, another point off for MCC. So now we've reached the last game in China MCC, which is Halo 4. Just like Halo 3, dead bodies in Halo 4 also just fade away, and there doesn't seem to be any exception to this rule either, unless it's something in cutscenes, but that applies to all the Halo games and doesn't really change much for this comparison. So, another point off for China MCC. That gives Halo Infinite a 4-0 advantage so far, thanks to the dead bodies category. We'll tally up all the points later at the end to determine the final winner, so don't worry about that too much right now. Let's move on to the next category, which is blood. Another major factor that separates T and M ratings. So, starting with Halo Infinite again, there's actually a little bit of blood here and there, more so than Halo 5. No matter which character you shoot, be it human or alien, there will always be a little bit of blood that comes out, just like a little bit of mist. It's really only a tiny amount of mist that comes out for a very brief amount of time, but it's not like previous Halo games, especially Halo 1, where you have lots of blood spraying out, though that's been gradually declining with each Halo game after Halo CE anyways. Also for Infinite, while there is blood that comes out the body, there is no blood splatter at all anywhere. Not on walls, and not on the ground. No matter how much blood you shoot out the body, the blood just goes nowhere. So, now let's see how China MCC stacks up again with that. Starting with Halo 1, well, there's absolutely no blood at all. And I mean none whatsoever anywhere. Even this room on 343 Guilty Spark, which was supposed to be covered by blood everywhere, and is often used by people in comparisons with how toned down Halo Infinite is now, there's just nothing there now. The whole flood containment facility on Mission 343 Guilty Spark is just squeaky clean, and just like no evidence of dead bodies anywhere, either due to all the blood removed or just no bodies either. So that's another point off for China MCC there. Next, for Halo 2, the censorship in the game has also resulted in there being absolutely no blood at all, and once again, many levels that are supposed to have dead bodies scattered around are now also very clean. So, another point off for China MCC. Moving on to Halo 3 though, things are a bit different. There is now some blood in the game, but only for non-human characters. Covenant characters like Brutes and Grunts will have some small amounts of blood spray out, but there will still be no blood splatter, just like how it is in Infinite actually. It's possible Halo Infinite used the China version of Halo 3 as a guideline or model for handling blood. The only blood splatter that's in Halo 3 is from some flood characters under certain circumstances. So, Halo 3, well, it might have a slight advantage, but unfortunately the complete lack of human blood once again gives Infinite the overall advantage here, so another point off for China MCC. Last up is Halo 4. This game is more or less the same as Halo 3, with blood for non-human characters, and no blood splatter at all, since there's no flood in Halo 4, but again, no blood at all for the human characters, so another point off for China MCC. Halo Infinite sweeps this category again with another 4-0 advantage. Next up, we have the category of Gore. This is probably one of the biggest factors that goes into an M rating. Halo Infinite, because of its T rating, cannot have any gore. The closest thing by the furthest stretch of the imagination would probably be this scene after Spartan Griffin is rescued and he's in really bad shape. It's not really that gruesome or gory of a scene, but that's probably the peak for Halo Infinite, and in gameplay there really is no gore either. Now let's see how that scene holds up to China MCC. So in Halo 1, the Keys cutscene has been completely censored to hide any sign of gore or Keys in pain. Also, human flood forms have been censored where if you get close enough to them, their textures just turn black, but it doesn't do that for the elite flood forms. So, it's quite censored in Halo 1, but there's one scene that actually gives Halo 1 the advantage here, and a slight advantage. And that's the mangled dead elite. We still see the body of the mangled elite in this cutscene, despite the body censorship in China MCC, and we can still tell its chest has been ripped open. It might not be a human character, but I'd say that's more gore than the Spartan Griffin scene in Halo Infinite. So, 1 point off from Halo Infinite this time. Next up with Halo 2. Despite the way dead bodies are censored, you can still have some small amounts of dismemberment with the Flood in Halo 2. For example, arms can still be shot off if you're careful, but you can no longer just totally break a Flood into several pieces anymore. You have to be a lot more surgical when trying to remove the arms of any Flood combat form. but if you do so much damage that you normally cause a flood to just break apart completely, it will just go poof instead of, breaking apart in China MCC. That applies to flood carriers as well. They don't explode, they just go poof. But the fact that there is any dismemberment at all gives Halo 2 the advantage over Halo Infinite. So that's another point off from Halo Infinite. Now, with Halo 3, the dismemberment has been removed this time compared to Halo 2, and you can no longer shoot the limbs off any flood. However, that doesn't mean Halo 3 loses here. So, Marines in Halo 3, and really any character, can still get infected by the flood while they're still alive. And some of them even still have that occasional animation where the Marine snaps his own neck while getting infected. That alone, I believe, puts Halo 3 back on top when it comes to this category. I mean, it's not dismemberment or anything, but that's probably still enough to fall into graphic violence of an ESRB's M rating when it comes to gore. So, Halo 3 wins here, and Infinite loses another point. Last up with Halo 4, there's really been no change to the level of gore in Halo 4, even with the Chinese government censorship, because it never really had much to begin with. The most gory scene in Halo 4 is and has always been when Dr. Tilson gets composed and you see her face dissolved by layers. This scene still exists in the China version of MCC, completely uncensored, and is definitely more gory than the Spartan Griffin's scene in Infinite. Therefore, Infinite loses another point, and China MCC sweeps this category with a 4-0 advantage. The next category we're going to compare is Friendly Fire. While not really a major factor in T vs M ratings, it can contribute to the last category we'll be comparing after this, which we'll get to soon. So in Halo Infinite, you can no longer portray Marines anymore, at least not that easily. For the most part, Marines can't be killed by you using most methods. Most weapons, explosives, melees, they all have no effect on your allies. The only way you can betray Marines in Infinite is either by splattering them with a vehicle, or using a special melee weapon like an energy sword. But betray Marines also no longer has any consequences like it did in previous games. What I mean by that is they no longer turn against you if you betray them enough. That's likely the case because 343 really didn't want you to engage in any combat with friendly Marines. There's evidence of this in Halo 5 as well, where you can never get any Marines to turn against you, no matter how many times you betray them. But if you betray enough elite allies, they will actually turn against you briefly. So rather than giving you an actual reason in gameplay to fight back against Marines, they just took the route of just not having Marines ever attack you for any reason whatsoever. As for why you're still allowed to betray them with certain methods in Halo Infinite, I have no idea why that's the case. It could have been an oversight, but I don't know for sure. As for how that compares to China MCC, well, let's start with Halo 1 again. In Halo 1, there's full friendly fire support, nothing was changed or censored about that. Betraying allies will have them turn against you very soon. In fact, the famous scene where if you betray Captain Keyes on the bridge and a bunch of Marines attack you still works in China MCC. So, 1 point off from Infinite. In Halo 2, same thing. No restrictions on friendly fire. Yeah, some characters like Johnson and Miranda are invincible, but they were always like that in the original games. There's been no new restrictions introduced in Halo 2 on friendly fire, so another point off from Infinite. Halo 3 is the same as well. You have full friendly fire and betrayal support with all the repercussions that come with it, so once again, no issue there. That's another point off from Infinite. And lastly, with Halo 4, you can still betray all your allies too and engage in combat with them as a result. In fact, Halo 4 in all versions did penalize you for killing civilians though, something that's sort of in Reach, but overall Halo 4 still has the advantage over Halo Infinite here. So, that's another point off from Infinite. China MCC, once again, sweeps another category with a 4-0 advantage. Alright, so for the final category, we're going to be comparing just general violence. Basically, all the other finer details lumped together into one bigger category. There will be a bit of overlap with some of the previous categories, but this should cover everything else people have been concerned about with Halo Infinite's T rating. So, starting with Halo Infinite again, there overall weren't that many violent scenes throughout the game. We have the Spartan Griffin scene, which is probably the most violent of all Halo Infinite. And then we have other scenes like when this brute gets slammed into the table, or the pilot getting tortured by Escharum. Everything else is really just implied violence. Like with Yeager being an elite assassin, we really don't see him do any assassinating in the game. And with Chaklock being a torture master, he also really doesn't do any torturing in the game. Again, it's all implied or mentioned off screen, so while we do have these very sadistic characters, the T rating prevents them from actually being anything close to how they're described. As for China MCC, well, starting with Halo 1, there's really no violence in this game anymore after everything's been completely censored, and there really wasn't to begin with either in the regular version of Halo 1. All that's left is also just implied or mentioned off screen with no evidence like dead bodies or blood left in the map to prove it either. So even though those cutscenes I showed in Infinite aren't really much in terms of violence, they still have a slight edge over the China version of Halo 1. Therefore, 1 point off from China MCC. Next is Halo 2. Because most of Halo 2's cutscenes were allowed to be played uncensored, including the anniversary ones, that means we'll get the full violence of scenes like Arbiter actually getting tortured on screen and up close, as well as the Prophet of Mercy's demise at the hands of a Flood infection form. Only the Gravemind cutscene is censored with its own China-exclusive version of it, but that barely tones down Halo 2 that much. So Halo 2 has the edge here, and Halo Infinite loses another point. Next up is Halo 3, which, like Halo 2, does not have any censored cutscenes. All the major scenes in Halo 3, like Miranda's death, Johnson's death, or the Prophet of Truth's death, are all allowed to appear uncensored, and even dead bodies of characters are allowed to appear in cutscenes too without restriction. So Halo 3 also takes the edge here and steals another point from Infinite. And last up with Halo 4. Aside from Dr. Tillson's cutscene, there weren't that many violent cutscenes to begin with. However, the more violent scenes happen during gameplay and are allowed to exist mostly uncensored as well. One example is the scene where a Promethean knight impales a Marine with his sword. The scene can be seen in full, but the Marine technically dies pretty quickly, so his body already starts to fade away before the whole sequence is finished, but you're still able to make out most of the cutscene of the whole sequence. Stuff like this just simply doesn't happen in Halo Infinite. And the cherry on top for Halo 4 is that even with the Chinese government censorship, assassinations are still allowed to exist, whereas they were completely removed from Halo Infinite. So, despite Halo 4 having relatively tame cutscenes already, its gameplay makes up for it and gives it an edge over Halo Infinite. So, another point off from Infinite. That brings the tally for this category to Halo Infinite 1 and China MCC 3. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this comparison. It's time to add up the final score. If you've been keeping up with the tally up until this point, then you probably already know the winner. So the final score for which game is less toned down than the other is Halo Infinite with 9 points and China MCC with 11 points. A lot of categories were pretty decisive, but some were also kinda close. Were you surprised by the outcome? I know I was. Honestly, before doing this comparison, I thought maybe all the times I and others have said that Halo Infinite is more toned down than the Chinese censored version of MCC, I thought that was just an exaggeration, maybe. But after looking at all these common categories, it's clear that while both games have had major features of previous Halo games stripped away or toned down, Halo Infinite is the one that goes a bit further, overall. Despite all the censorship that the Chinese government required and the resulting Aegis 3 and up rating for China MCC, it still manages to eke out a slight victory here for being ever so slightly less toned down than Halo Infinite. But keep in mind that this is just an overall score. Like I said, some categories like Blood and Dead Bodies were decisively in Halo Infinite's favor. So, if those are the only categories you care about, then you could say Halo Infinite is the less toned down version of the two. It's all up to you to make the final judgment of what was toned down too much in Infinite versus what doesn't really matter either way. So, that wraps it up for this video. Like I said, this video wasn't meant to be a knock on Infinite, and, whether you're for or against Infinite's T rating, it's all fine. This video was just to inform and draw a comparison with the China version of Halo MCC, and really try to prove a theory right or wrong. So hopefully you all found this comparison to be interesting, and for those of you who haven't seen or heard of the China edition of MCC before seeing this video, I do have another video covering more aspects of China MCC. I'll link it in the description below, and feel free to watch it if you want to learn more about it. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like if you did, and feel free to discuss all this in the comments down below. Aside from that, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all next time. Bye, guys!